Luther College High School community. I'm Pastor Sarah Dymund from Trinity here in Regina. Some of you may recognize me because I came and did chapel before Christmas. And when we used to be allowed to run around the school, you probably saw me running around the school because I have a couple of kids who go to Luther. But Mr. Steve asked me to make a video chapel for this time of social isolation and social distancing, socially distant friends, for staying in touch. And because we are still in the season of Lent, that is what I've been asked to talk about, and it seemed like a good thing to focus on. When we get to Easter, we'll figure out how we do resurrection like this. But I've been thinking a lot about how we can see this time of social distancing and self-isolation as ways that we can practice the Lenten disciplines that are traditional to our faith of fasting, prayer, and almsgiving that we hear about in the piece of the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew's Gospel that we read for our Gospel lesson on Ash Wednesday. Some of that is maybe more obvious than others, but I think that it might help us to see, if we see this as a time of faithful response, it might be less frustrating, or it might be a way to just reset and think about things differently. So the first one, fasting, is most commonly thought of as giving something up for Lent. One of the things that's been coming across my Facebook feed is a meme that says, I hadn't really planned on giving up quite so much for Lent this year. And we've given up a lot. But I think that when we think about this as a fasting, as a discipline, it's not just about giving up stuff that's fun. I mean, the way we're taught in Scripture to fast is to do it as a faithful response, to contemplate all that God has done and is doing for us, to contemplate the things that distract us from our relationship with God and neighbor. And Martin Luther defined sin as being turned in on ourselves and away from God and our neighbor. And so when we are in Lent repenting of our sin, what we think about is how we can turn back to God and neighbor and creation. And whether you're Lutheran or not, whether you're Christian or not, thinking about how we can be more connected with one another and less turned in on ourselves and obsessed with our own wants and desires is not a bad practice. So fasting, what we're doing in our culture, we have this unique opportunity to realize how much we take for granted, how much we think of as essential, how much we think we need. And stripping those down to finding out what actually is essential gives us a chance to not be constantly distracted by stuff, but also to think about what are we missing and why. And think about those people who don't have more than the essentials, or even as much as the essentials. And this gives us a chance to appreciate life maybe from a different perspective, if we have privilege that we're getting this unique opportunity to check. So that's fasting, one way of looking at it, I think. Another Lenten discipline is almsgiving, which is giving people who have stuff to give, money to give, resources to give, giving it to those who are less fortunate. And that's something that we really have an opportunity to do right now, in various and different ways. I talked to you some before Christmas when I came for chapel about our food pantry in Regina, and that's getting more and more need. The number of people coming is growing at the same rate as this virus, just about. I had 46 people come one day this week and 77 the next. The need is out there, and people who have trouble getting what is actually essential at the best of times are having an even harder time now. So if your family has the resources to actually give something to others, there are various ways in which that can be done. One is at Trinity, at our food pantry. My family and I spent last evening packing up a bunch of these things. This is what we give out for food for one person for one day. And if you try living on it, apparently you get pretty hungry. That's something that could be done. There are other organizations as well that are doing this similar things. Carmichael Outreach is giving out soup. The Salvation Army is doing bag lunches in various community school parking lots. The Sikh Association is giving out meals and I think delivering groceries. So there are different organizations that are doing things faithfully to help those in need. And if you have the resources to contribute, that might be something you can do. If you and your family need those resources, please reach out and find them. Know that they are there. But I also was thinking of another way that we could think of social distancing itself as being a form of almsgiving by keeping ourselves and our families at low risk and doing everything we can to flatten the curve and slow the spread of this virus throughout our community. We are keeping the resources available for those who need them most by not glutting the system or being foolish about it. Another thing that came up in my Facebook feed recently was talking about that day a couple of weeks ago when everything first started shutting down and everybody went hog wild and bought out all the toilet paper and pushed each other out of the way and was stockpiling on Lysol wipes so that people couldn't get these items. And what this thing came up in my Facebook feed said was, imagine that instead of toilet paper and Lysol wipes was ICU beds and ventilators. If we go out and run around and aren't careful and responsible about the viral spread of infection, we will overwhelm the system, and the resources that we have available will not be adequate. So by being responsible and careful, we are in fact helping to make sure that our resources are equitably distributed in our community. So that in itself is a form of almsgiving. The other Lenten discipline is prayer. And prayer is talking to God at its simplest. One of my seminary professors described prayer as participating in God's talking to God's self, which I think is an interesting way of thinking about it as well. Prayer is something that we can do at any time. It's one thing that we can do when we really feel like we have nothing else to do. And so that's a positive thing to do, a way to think about our blessings and our benefits and our privileges and be thankful for all the things that we have that are positive, and also to bring our doubts, fears, worries, concerns before God is very, very powerful. But even if you're not a religious person or praying isn't something that you are comfortable with or comes easily to you, there's other things that we do that I think fit into the same category of how we are in the world, kind of prayerfully. One of the things I know that teenagers in particular, my teenagers anyway, are very good at is being in contact with one another through social media. People are putting words and pictures out into the world and connecting with people in that way all the time. You're physically distant from one another, but I know that you're all in contact with the world and with each other. And this is a time when I think it's really important to use your power for good, to use those communications to be putting good, powerful, uplifting, positive thoughts into the world. That is in itself a form of prayer, a form of being connected to one another, to God, if you believe in such a being, that a lot of negative and destructive and damaging things can be done in the ways we connect with one another. But the way we're going to get through this best, maybe only at all, is if we focus on our common humanity, our common need. And so use those abilities to connect with one another to be positive and life-giving. And those are the things I've been thinking about for how we can think of this time as a time of Lenten discipline, because it's taking a greater level of discipline than any of us is really, really used to in our privileged part of the world. And so I wish you all blessings for the rest of Lent. Send me an email if you want. Take care.